Hello and welcome to today's episode of Stand Up, where I am currently rebranding the opening segment to, while still covering the news, focus on some positive ideas and people. You're going to hear me doing new things, throwing things up against the wall in this first segment over the next week or so. And tonight, you can hang out with me to come up with those ideas, to shoot them down. It's the Stand Up with Pete Dominick brainstorming meeting. Any stand-up subscriber that wants to come, and you can be one for as little as $5 a month. You'll get an email with the link. We'll meet. We'll talk about this podcast and how we can make it better, learn more, be more positive, and why the 24/7 news drip into your veins is making your life more miserable. So as we continue to focus on all of the issues that affect us and our world, interviewing the best experts we can find together, and we do, so often they come from you, we're also going to change the focus a little bit, tweak some things, and have some fun as well. So tonight, Tuesday, hope to see you at the 8 o'clock East Hangout. There'll be a link in your email if you're a subscriber. Joining me today on the show, two very good guests, both first-timers, constantly looking for new guests. And one is a Washington Post reporter who covered all of the aftermath of the George Floyd murder in Minneapolis, and along with his colleague at the Washington Post, Robert Samuels, has written a new book. His name is George, One Man's Life and the Struggle for Racial Justice. I speak for the first time with Washington Post reporter Toluse Olorunnipa. Such an important book that touches on so many of the systemic racist issues here in the United States of America, certainly as they apply to George Floyd and so many others' lives in this country in 2022. You're going to love the book, and I think you're going to love my interview with Toluse for the first time. And in an effort to talk about the actual real-life issues that every one of us are inevitably going to have to deal with or are already dealing with, I welcome for the first time on the show Rebecca Soffer, who is an author, has written a new book called The Modern Loss Handbook, an interactive guide to moving through grief and building your resilience. If you've lost anybody in your life, her work is so helpful. Modernloss.com. She was just on CBS with Gayle King being interviewed about this new book. And now I've got her, and she happens to be an old colleague of mine. I didn't know that. Can you say colleague if you worked with someone on Comedy Central's The Colbert Report? I mean, she was a field producer, an associate producer. I was the warm-up comedian, but we did get to know each other okay. And obviously, we've gone in quite different directions since then. But her work is so great, and it's a candid conversation about grief. She's very funny and thoughtful and super smart. Modernloss.com is the website, but we talk about her new book as well, The Modern Loss Handbook. I think you're going to really like that. And that's the kind of interview. I want to do a lot more of these. So if there are people that can talk to us about anything from addiction to anxiety to depression to any of the fears around loss and death and grief and COVID and you name it, climate change, all of these things that bring us anxiety in our lives, I want to talk to those people on the show as well, because I think that will make a positive impact. And I'm positive if you read Modern Loss, if you go to modernloss.com, you'll find some great resources if you've suffered loss anytime in your life. So check that out as well. So Rebecca Soffer and Toluse Olorunnipa both join me on today's show for the first time. Thank you for listening. This week is brought to you by 800 paid subscribers. You should be one of them. Go to standupwithpete.com and Indeed.com, which is the premier job hiring website. If you need to hire someone, you need Indeed.com/Pete Dominick. Talk about that later. I'm actually doing the show in the afternoon. I have an event to go to in the city. It's certainly not related to my friend Kelly Carlin and the release of the new HBO documentary on George Carlin called George Carlin's American Dream. The event is certainly not related to that, but I'm very excited for that, and I hope that you, if you haven't seen it yet, it's on HBO. So check that out. And now I will give you just a couple of news stories. No fanfare. Just want to tell you about things that I'm seeing. Oh, but there will be fanfare. There's going to be all kinds of new production. Pete Coe and I talking about new jingles, new openings, all of it. Can't wait to hear from you tonight at 8. Bear with me while we're under construction. Pardon our dust, if you will. What? Sorry about that. All right, here are a few stories. Let's start with this. Oxfam tells Davos time to tax growing billionaire club. So apparently Davos is happening, the Davos Summit, and where a bunch of rich people get together and I don't know what exactly they're doing, waxing each other's taints and deciding what to do. But in recent years, they've been brought to task, and the COVID pandemic has created a new billionaire, they say, every 30 hours. And now 1 million people could fall into extreme poverty at the same pace. What? Oxfam saying this today at the Davos Summit. A new billionaire every 30 hours, and now 1 million people could be falling into extreme poverty at the same pace. The international charity said it was time to tax the rich to support the less fortunate as the global elite gathered at the Swiss mountain haven for the World Economic Forum after a 2-year COVID-induced absence. Oxfam also says it expects 263 million people to sink into extreme poverty this year at a rate of 1 million every 33 hours as soaring inflation has added a cost of living crisis on top of COVID. So, I mean, eat the rich. Tax the... No one should be a billionaire. I've weighed on this a million times. I think it's evil. It's completely immoral. Whether it's black and white tax policy or whether it's a lot more difficult to get that money back and redistribute it to people who are falling into poverty and give them opportunities for healthcare, education, and employment, that's for a longer conversation. But certainly wanted to mention that. Also, I saw this, and hopefully you haven't missed it, but despite Russia's continuous efforts to thwart political dissidents and protests against the invasion of Ukraine, concertgoers in St. Petersburg, Russia, joined together and gave a vocal condemnation of the war. Russian opposition politician and ally of Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny, a guy named Lyubov Sobol, posted footage on social media of hundreds of people chanting, "Fuck the war," inside of Russia. Reports indicate the protests happened on Friday at the A2 Green concert venue during a show from the Russian rock band Kiss Kiss. I don't know if I said that right, but pretty interesting and important development there. Oh, and how about this horrific news? There's been apparently a 50% jump in active shooter incidents from 2020 to 2021. I'm not sure I needed to read that headline or statistic if I'm trying to make you feel better here at the top of the show, but didn't want to ignore that big headline. Not sure if you would see it being reported elsewhere. That's why I'm going to read those ones. There's a whole active shooter incidents in the United States increased more than 50% from 2020 to 2021, according to a new report. Over the past 5 years, active shooter incidents have steadily increased, the FBI said. With the most recent in Buffalo, New York on May 14th, when the gunman killed 10 black folks at a local supermarket. The new report is titled Active Shooter Incidents in the United States in 2021, says there were 61 mass shooting incidents in 2021 in the U.S., representing nearly 100% in active shooter incidents from 2017, which saw only 31. And for all of those of you who are panicking about monkeypox, as far as I can tell, there's not really a need to panic. While it's here and it's spreading, the U.S. apparently very well prepared to handle the threat. The more than 90 cases of monkeypox that the World Health Organization has confirmed are just the tip of the iceberg, but President Biden said Sunday Americans should be concerned about monkeypox, but also sent a more reassuring message on Monday, citing the smallpox vaccine's effectiveness on monkeypox. And all the executives I've seen talking about it don't seem to be too concerned. And I've reached out to a couple folks to talk about that and COVID for this week. But if you got any questions about that or any fears about something else, I could probably get an expert on that can help understand and navigate those along with me. And if you're paying attention to the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial, then you're going to be disappointed that it apparently is entering its 6th and final week. If you're not paying attention, you're going to be psyched to not have to hear your kids talking about it because apparently it's dominating TikTok. So that's good news. Australia elected a new prime minister. Did you know that? He's a center-left guy. They used to have a center-right guy. My friends in Australia who are very progressive think this is better than the last guy. That's for sure. Maybe not good enough, but that's the recap on that election. Yet another new report coming out saying that masks are safe and effective in helping prevent the spread of COVID-19, in case you didn't believe that. And apparently President Joe Biden stepped in a pile of shit when he said that the U.S. will defend Taiwan if China invades. So I wonder how long we'll have to hear about that gaffe this week. All right, that's all the news I've got for you. So I'm now going to jump into the interviews. How does that make you feel? Are you okay with that? In personal news, I trimmed my beard and shaved my head. I mean, what else do you need to know? I've done 100 push-ups and 30 pull-ups and haven't eaten anything but a pear, and it's 3 o'clock. I mean, do you need any other updates? Okay, then. Let's get to my first guest, who, very excited. Like I said, both guests joining me for the first time, but let's have a conversation about grief and loss right now with someone who is excellent at it, who's now got a whole website and initiative dedicated and 2 books as well. Very excited to welcome her to the show for the first time. Like I said earlier, we're old colleagues from the Colbert Report, where she was an associate producer. Check out her website, modernloss.com. I highly recommend you check that out. It's a place where people share the unspeakably taboo, unbelievably hilarious, and unexpectedly beautiful terrain of navigating life after a death. Beginners welcome. I just love that. Candid conversation about grief. Beginners welcome. modernloss.com. And her new book, she's the co-author, I should say, of A Candid Conversation About Grief. But her new book, she authored alone. It's called The Modern Loss Handbook, an interactive guide to moving through grief and building your resilience. I'm so excited to welcome my old friend, Rebecca Soffer, on the show to talk about this work right now. I didn't know that that was your new name. I didn't know that you had gone a slightly different direction in your career. When last Rebecca and I saw each other, we were working together at Comedy Central's The Colbert Report, where you were a field producer, associate producer?
Yeah, field producer, yes.
And so we both were on Nagin Farsad's podcast, and you're like, Pete, remember me? And I'm like, what? Oh, my God. What are you doing with this work and these books and what happened? And you said to me, you were always such a dick.
That's not fair, Pete. That is not what I said, but it does work better for the show. Yeah. So yeah, you were such a dick to me all the time. It's
I didn't have that deep of a relationship with most people because I came in for 20 minutes a night or sometimes an hour, to do the warm up. And, but I certainly gravitated towards, several people and got to know you well enough to know how talented and funny you are. So hopefully I wasn't a dick ever. But
you weren't. Actually, I in all seriousness, I've actually been following your career for years because you didn't make like a random left turn and start working in, like, I don't know, you didn't become a vet or whatever. So I followed your comedy career as it's wonderfully grown and flourished. And, but I have great memories of you from warming up the audience because you were always nice to everybody. Like, you were such a great presence in the studio. And it's funny because he's going to kill me for saying this, but I told my husband that I was talking to you and I'm like, oh, you probably don't remember him because this was a long time ago. He goes, oh my God, I get so nervous when I hear his name. And I'm like, why? And he goes, because I just remember sitting in the audience and being so nervous that he was going to call on me. He's like, I actually have a stress response when I hear his name because I was like always terrified that the warm-up person was going to pull me in.
What is his name?
His name is Justin.
Justin. I'm
Justin.
Here. Justin, I want to tell you, those days are over. When you hear my name now, I want you to know this is a safe space for us. I'd love to grab a beer. And if whatever we do, we'll go in public, we'll grab a drink, Justin, you and I will fucking make fun of you so hard in front of everybody that's there because I want you to fear me forever, sir. That is so weird, and I feel so bad.
It's okay. Well, now he knows that his fear factor should be even more so.
Oh my God,
thank you for traumatizing my family.
That is the weirdest thing, and I'm going to find something really funny to do for him. I'm just gonna, or maybe I'll just pop up in front of him like, hey.
Yeah, like in Fisherman's Wharf, like the Bushman.
You just walk up to him and just start making fun of him. What's with those shoes, Justin? What? My worst nightmare.
Poor guy.
All right, maybe a good segue into, I said my worst nightmare, loss. You have I've told people about your work and a little bit about your life, of course, but you have done this amazing, amazing thing, which is basically launch a whole media channel. You've got this great website and now 2 books, which the first you co-wrote, this one you authored yourself, The Modern Loss Handbook. It's an interactive guide. Like, this is how to move through grief, how to build resilience. And I just want to be clear. This is almost entirely about losing a loved one, a human, right? We're not talking about divorce or job loss or other kinds of loss. This is really specifically about losing a loved one. Is that fair to say?
It is, because I think that grief is like an umbrella experience that relates to so many life experiences. And all of those things that you mentioned are absolutely, I mean, if it feels like grief to you, it's actual grief. The way that I wrote it and the way that we have kind of built out modern loss is primarily to allude to it as loss from a death, right? And that we have pieces about pet loss on our site, but we talk about death because we feel like there are so many things that we have to talk about that stem from death loss that they kind of automatically translate into helping you think through other type of losses that you're going to live. So even like the resilience building and the tricks and the memory and rituals that I talk about in the book, I think they can translate to other types of loss experience. But to keep things simple, because you can only do so many things qualitatively, modern loss is specifically primarily talking about losses that stems from a physical death. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think what makes the conversation that you're leading, hosting, writing about, interviewing experts on for your work different than almost anything else I've seen is your sense of humor. I mean, there's a reason that you worked at the Colbert Report. Like all of the people who did anything, even the graphics people, were funny. Like no matter what you did, you kind of couldn't be in that family if you didn't have a good sense of humor. You have always had an amazing sense of humor, and you approach this with that whenever possible. Obviously, it's tough. But my point is, what you guys are doing, your new book and the website, your whole initiative, is you're talking about loss, death, differently, because we don't know how to talk about death. Is it in America? Is it in Western culture? Is it our generation? You're talking about it differently. That makes it different and so good. I'm loving it.
Thank you so much. I mean, well, thanks. I'd like to think I have a sense of humor.
You're hilarious.
I hope I have a good one. And yeah, like everyone at the show, I don't think that you would have probably worked for the Colbert Report if you weren't viewed as having some sort of an appreciation and understanding of humor. In fact, I think that one of the ways I got the job was you had to pitch all these ideas. And there was a Wall Street Journal article that came out that was about, cruises, and how there was like an economics professor that was very, very earnestly suggesting that elderly people just live out the rest of their lives on cruise ships because they would put less of a burden on the society in the contiguous United States. Like there are hospitals there's buffets, there's entertainment. You're kind of like moving it out of the way. And I think I pitched that, for the Colbert sensibility is we figured it out. Like America, we fixed America.
It's amazing.
And I think that was appreciated. But,
oh my God. I mean, can we talk about that for the rest of our time? That is hilarious. Anyway, go ahead. So using that kind of humor in your work.
I just think it's really important. And look, the reason I went to journalism school at Columbia right before working for the Colbert Report. So I was on this journalism track.
Is it because you never wanted to have any money?
No, I don't like legal tender. No, I don't. I like the promise of maybe one day. I assure you that for anyone thinking that grief is like a lucrative thing to work in, this is not.
I was more saying you go to Columbia Journalism School and then you work for Comedy Central salary.
Terrible choices financially along the way. And so I
think
realized,
if you get rich off of your talking about loss, that would be potentially one of the most noble ways to make money one could think of. So for what it's worth.
Negative. But after I graduated J school, I had heard that Stephen was getting his own show on Terry Gross. They were talking about it. And I got a text from my mom saying, I think you have to work for Stephen Colbert. And we already loved him from The Daily Show. And I was like, I love that you said that because I've already decided that that's where I want to work. And I'm really glad that I have your blessing because now I'm going to be like super poor forever. And so I just kind of went for that job with all that I had. But one of the reasons that I really loved the idea of working in something that used humor to get through really important messages was because sometimes you have to use some humor to get through some really important messages that people might be otherwise nervous or bored or overwhelmed or scared to absorb, right? I mean, we all watch these shows. We watch John Oliver and Colbert and Samantha Bee. And sometimes you come out of a half-hour show being like, I fully understand Bitcoin or like the Russian oligarchy in ways where it might not absorb as well if you're watching it on a non-satirical format, right? And it's because, you can only bash people over the head with important messages so much until they zone out.
Yep.
They're like, this is too much for me.
Yep.
I've gotten your primary message, but now I'm going to go run for the hills and like not talk to you again. Like just watch the Kardashians for a month because this is too much. Now I learned really well at Colbert, even better than I even had the inkling about that. You know, if you do it in the right way, you can pull people in. You're not making fun of a tough thing. You're not making fun of a hard thing. You're showing it as a human thing. And you're giving the humans who are watching it and listening to that message the respect of acknowledging that they are also humans. And it's okay if like they're uncomfortable and they laugh and they, you know, have some levity because you need a release sometimes, especially when you're dealing with uncomfortable topics. And so with Modern Loss, that is exactly what I do. We approach the topic of grief and the long arc of loss. We're not just talking about like, I had a miscarriage yesterday or my mom died last month. We're talking about like, you know, I'm now a parent and my mom died 15 years ago. And you know what? It's still really hard in different ways. I kind of have to talk about it with somebody, and we do it with warmth, with levity whenever possible, because we're all very much alive. We need to feel human in this experience. And grief and loss is an extension of the life experience, which is messiness. So if you can't laugh about some of this, you know, and build community when you're having that like knowing connection of like laughter, like what a shit show is this, then like sometimes, like what else do you have sometimes?
So well said. Yeah. And so many things to talk about in the book, and as you call it, a candid conversation about grief. Beginner's welcome. It's the greatest kind of like pitch or subtitle, because most people haven't suffered a tragic loss up to a certain age, obviously, until maybe their parents, if they're close. But you know, there's so many different types of loss: mother, father, spouse or partner, sibling, miscarriage and stillbirth, child, friend, grandparent, pet, more. And I'm just reading this from modernloss.com, the types of loss. How do we talk about different types of loss? How do we relate to people who have different kinds? Mine is not yours, even if, by the way, it is the same: a parent, a partner, or God forbid, a child. How do we, it's a different conversation all the time, isn't it?
It is. It's totally different. It's very nuanced. And that's why we don't, you know, I co-founded the site 8 years ago with my friend Gabby Berkner. And the reason that it's not like in all these sections, we have very vague categories, right? Like parent loss or whatever. But beyond that, we just tag everything, like every essay, every resource piece at the end, where with all the tags that it pertains to, because a mother loss piece may also pertain to like another life experience, where you don't just have to talk to somebody who lost their mom if you lost their mom to bond over the shit show that is the grief experience. I think that there are so many different permutations and combinations of loss out there, and we recognize that not even two people who are grieving the same person are having the same experience, right? There's no possible way.
Right.
Every single person has a different dynamic and relationship with another person. Every single person. And even in families, you have siblings who are like, you know, well, like, I don't view dad in the same way that you did. Like, you were the favorite, or like, I had this unresolved issue. I mean, hopefully that doesn't happen, but let's be honest, it does. And so we just like to say, look, grief is grief is grief. There's no grief hierarchy. There are no grief Olympics. We know that miscarriage is an awful thing. We know stillbirth is a terrible thing. We know that losing someone in a car accident is awful, and to a long illness is awful. We're literally not ranking these. Like, we all get the shittiest award here, right? So now that we've agreed that we all get the shittiest award, let's just like talk about it. Like, let's figure out a way to build connection and community through storytelling, because I really believe in, you know, storytelling is a change agent. And especially when it comes to a theme about loss and grief, which is so universal, but so stigmatized. And like you said, it's like we do a crap job of talking about it. In the United States, in Western culture, we don't like remembering that we're mortal. We don't like remembering that the people we care about are mortal. I don't like remembering that my Labradoodle is 12 years old. Like, that sucks, you know? I don't like that. But like, she is. And I need to be vaguely aware that everything is finite. I don't want to be just shocked when I realize that it is, in the way that I was when my mom died. It was incredibly destructive to like be made aware of that fact and be surrounded by a lot of people who also didn't know how to talk about it. And so Modern Loss is really aiming through its publications, through its online presence and newsletter, through its online community and offline community, to just give people an ongoing invitation to talk about where they're at, whatever it is, like a question, a complaint, a need for a primal scream, need for advice, and feel like there are other people who are always willing to like give them that invitation and not like make them feel weird about it. Because it's not weird.
It's not weird, but we make it weird in so many different ways. And that's what you're working to help solve. How and why do we make it weird?
We make it weird in so many ways. Like, we are so good at like sucking at this, and it's not our fault. So I just want to say to anyone listening, it's not your fault.
Yeah,
I continually stick my foot in my mouth when I'm trying to comfort someone with whom I don't feel like I have a real shared like experience firsthand. I still struggle with the right thing to say or do. I still get awkward. So like, I'm absolutely like in this club with you. But I think that we're not good at it because we haven't normalized it. So we're not doing anyone any favors by not like just like airing all of this stuff out loud. There's nothing wrong with talking about how like the second year of grief can be shittier than the first. There's nothing wrong with talking about how like when you reach the age that maybe your mom died, that can really throw you through a loop and it can really sideline you for a little bit because you weren't expecting it. You weren't expecting that like additional feeling of grief. We should talk about the fact that like, if you've had a miscarriage and you're walking down the street and it looks like every other person around you is pregnant, it's okay to feel abject jealousy and anger. Like, these are natural human reactions. And I think the less that we feel like we can be acknowledged in those feelings by society, and at the very least by like some trusted people in our lives, the more that feeling of unacknowledgement is going to grow and feel really, really bad. And if we don't feel acknowledged when we're going through something that's legitimately a hard thing to go through, I mean, it's so hard to feel seen and feel like you can heal. Yeah. You just feel like you're living on your own planet, What
happens when someone at work or kind of tangentially, maybe in your community, suffers a loss, everybody knows it, and you don't know what to do or what to say. And I think you say, it's not great to say, how are you doing? Because, they're probably not at their best. So what works in those situations where your intention is to let them know they're being seen, but also, am I going to bring something up? Am I going to say the wrong thing? How can you help us there?
Yeah, I think that like the first thing is, honestly, don't be scared. I just spent 1 minute on a tirade saying how much we suck at this, but like, don't be scared. I mean, because I think that the worst thing that people do is they don't say anything and they don't attempt. I think that people will always remember that you tried to reach out, you tried to be there for somebody, and they'll always remember if you literally ignored the fact that something major and hard happened in their life. And I think that they'll remember it at work. They'll remember it in their personal lives. They'll remember it everywhere. And they'll also remember who came out of the woodwork for them. And so I think that we all search for that perfect thing to say to a colleague, to even a good friend. And guess the secret is the perfect thing to say when you're at a complete loss is, I wish I had the perfect thing to say. And I don't. I really wish I did. I wish I could fix this for you and erase this, but I know I can't. And I just want you to know, though, that I'm here to listen. And if it's not like tonight, next week, like, I'm going to keep reaching out and I'm here for you. Like, I'm here to talk about it and listen. And like, instead of just saying like, if there's anything I can do, ... which is like, oh my God, that's like telling an employee that they have unlimited vacation, that you just like stress them out. It's like, how do you respond to something like that? You feel like, well, I'm not going to ask for anything because they didn't offer anything specific and I'm in an overwhelmed period of time. I think it's really great to offer specific things. If you have a colleague who had a loss and you feel comfortable enough saying, hey, maybe you already have someone out there like that, but if you want me to like be a point person at work, like if you want to tell me when there are hard dates coming up and I can email people, that's cool. Like, I'm happy to do that for you. Or if we're back at the office and like you need a day every week to go for a coffee or whatever, I can do that for you. And if you don't want to go that's cool. Like, but I'm going to keep offering. If you want to volunteer to be somebody who like disseminates information for that person, that's an enormous weight off someone's shoulders who is already feeling incredibly exposed and vulnerable. And like everybody is not only like staring at them as the person going through something, but also is like evaluating their work performance. Like talk about stress, in the workplace after a loss.
Such great advice. So great. I am so glad I reconnected with you. Is it condescending for me in this case, based on our past, to say, I'm so proud of you. I'm so impressed with you. It seems like saying you're proud of somebody is like, what am I? Your dad? Your dad passed away, but I'm sure that he would, your parents never probably thought you were going to go in this trajectory. But I think you said something in one of your speeches about losing them, but you found a whole new family, a whole new, I'm just so impressed with what you've done. I think that this book is going to help and your work is going to help legions of people. So I just wanted to say that. I didn't mean to say it in a weird way like that.
No, I really appreciate that. I mean, honestly, first of all, it's not inappropriate at all. I am very hard on myself. I'm actually legitimately self-deprecating. I have a very low confidence issue. It's like it feels very weird to like promote a book about grief where there's maybe a perception. It's like, oh, she wrote a book and like she just wants to be like a grief person. Like I actually don't, like for the record, I don't. I would love to go back to another career in content that has nothing to do with this. But I feel like I'm somebody who is willing to speak to a certain extent about my own experiences publicly. And when I reach that extent, I have the ability to create a community and I know what content needs to be out there that can resonate with that community and help those people connect with each other. So I feel like by the very nature of, my professional capacity as like a writer or producer, and also just like that sensibility, that sense of humor and living with this shit show across the long arc, that I am a good person in the very large world of amazing people who are doing this with their own personalities and expertise. I'm not a therapist. I'm just a person who's been in it. And so I do appreciate you saying that you're proud of me. And I think that against the backdrop of all the things that are being said in the world about all the things, that's like an incredibly innocuous and kind thing to say to someone.
Good. I'm glad it was received the way I intended it to. By the way, Rebecca's next book, Shit Show in the Long Arc, is going to be really important because it's, a lot of what we're seeing. But I think. Wait
till you see the illustrations for that one.
Just an arc of shit, a rainbow of crap.
Yeah, it's got smelly stickers too.
So this book is a really important, I think, resource. So is the website. I've really been enjoying navigating that and reading things there and your articles that you constantly, update. But this is the kind of book, I think, I know you might feel uncomfortable selling it, not to me. This is the kind of book you might want to get for someone when, I was telling somebody that I was going to interview you and she was like, oh, can I meet her? Like, I want to meet her. I want to talk to her. Like, so the book itself is a huge resource. So I want to try to sell it by saying The Modern Loss Handbook, an interactive guide to moving through grief and building your resilience. It's an interactive book. I mean, what are the guiding principles for how this book is written?
So I basically wrote this book because it's what I wish that someone would have given me. I got 14 edible arrangements the week after my mom died. I lived in a very small apartment on 68th and Riverside alone with like my college age furniture. So like there wasn't a lot of room for edible arrangements and not even one of them. I also didn't have much of an appetite. And I got a lot of like Chicken Soup for the Souls and like, a lot of like self-help books that, to be honest, I'm sure they're very well done. And I'm not judging them in terms of like their quality. It's just that they didn't resonate with me. I just needed to feel seen in what I was going through. I needed to be spoken to in a way that wasn't just clinical or like religious or with platitudes. Like, I mean, another thing we do wrong, you were asking like lots of, they're in a better place. You know what you should do. Weren't they wearing a seatbelt? Like all these things that like we say wrong. I just wanted to feel like I was literally being given kind of like a choose your own adventure roadmap for how to get through this crap. And without judgment. Like I really wanted things that I could try out And then if they didn't work for me, then there were more ideas in there that I could try out and build on. So I wrote this thing with 3 goals, which is to help you stay connected to your person. And I do that through talking about ritual, like getting through trigger days, reframing really important days creatively. Also lots of different questions and prompts, because I think a lot of us in grief get very nervous that we're going to forget. And I want to encourage you to remember that you can actually remember. I ask you a lot of hard questions too, because guess what? I'm not a therapist, but you might want to take some of this stuff to your therapist because it's really important.
Right.
And I argue that sometimes it's even more important than remembering what their favorite, color was. So stay connected to your person, stay connected to yourself. So there are all these sections about the connection between the mind and the body in grief, how we don't talk about enough about how grief totally shakes your body down, how you can treat your body better, treat your mind better. I go over a lot of different, tried and true therapies that seem to help a lot of people. I make a case for grief support and why you should get it. And then there's a whole section about DIY therapies, I give you ideas to writing and music based and all these other things, how to care for your sleep and dreams. And then the final goal is to help you stay connected to the world around you, which is guess what? You still have to deal with your career. You still have to probably try and not get fired because you probably have to pay rent. You still have to deal with your personal relationships. You have to navigate social dynamics. You might have to navigate intimate dynamics. So I talk about how can you stay connected to the world around you and feel like you're kind of owning your own narrative and standing up for what you need and trying to get what you need from the right people. And in a selfish way. But if you do it selfishly in a way that isn't hurting yourself or anyone else, then it just makes you feel like you're more resilient. And then you're able to hopefully give more back to those people. This is a ripple effect.
I am so fortunate and lucky and privileged in my life that I didn't really have to know what resilience was until I lost my corporate media job a couple years ago. I really never had a kind of suffered a blow that was going to change the trajectory of me. I piled up a lot of wins, Rebecca, until that. So you opened the book with what is resilience. I learned a lot about it. And during that time, I had a lot of really good people in my life close to me who dealt with a lot of it and built so much of it. So how do you define it to people who haven't dealt with it, and even people who do but don't call it that?
Yeah. I know that, I talk about resilience as being a buzzword because, it is. It's become in social media it's a hashtag, me time or self-care, mindfulness. But the truth is that resilience is actually an incredibly important idea and term to learn, which is basically the ability to recover from or adjust easily or with time to something really hard in your life. And, there is a lot that has to do with resilience that people should know about. It's when life tosses, you were talking about career based, right? When it's only sometimes when life tosses you a curveball that you realize how resilient you are, or you're forced to level up for yourself and build it. And the good news is that it's like a muscle. You can actually build it up. And if you don't build it up, you could actually atrophy it. You really can. The nice news is that you're not born with a set amount. I think I even talk in the book. It's not like male pattern baldness. It's not like whether cilantro tastes like crap. Sorry. I don't know if you've male, I don't know. That could be a shave. What do I know?
Come on.
We're on Zoom.
Who would choose this?
But, I just think that I want people to know that from me, again, I'm not a therapist. And yes, I wrote a book not being a therapist about grief, but I think that's okay because I think anyone who has an experience with grief is an expert in grief.
Right.
And I think that just resilience is an incredibly critical skill. And there are different ways to cope with challenging situations. Your way of coping with one may be totally different than someone else's. And that's okay. I think we get bogged down in they're so resilient because they powered through that thing. I don't believe in powering through anything. I think that sometimes it's okay to spend a morning in a snotty heap in your bathroom if you feel like that's what you need.
Yeah.
To take the next step.
Yeah.
All of this is sometimes 5 steps forward 25 steps back.
Sure.
That's okay. That's what I'm trying to get people to realize. But yeah, again, resilience is something you should learn about, and also build it. You can build it. I mean, and a lot of it when it comes to grief, within the pages of this book, and I'm not talking about when you need additional help, like medicine. By the way, great. Like, take medication if you need it. Get other supports. There are so many other ways to get help that fold into the things that are within this book. But if you try some of these things and you realize they're helping you, that is resilience building, because then you have different tools in your pocket that you can pull out at any given moment. Yeah. When grief sneak attacks you, you have different things that you've built up, different coping mechanisms.
You can't, I'm learning this. You can't control your thoughts. You can just recognize them and deal with them. Like, it's hard to prevent, especially with loss. I'm guessing more than having lived it. It's hard to prevent anything from a smell to a song to anything that jogs a memory. And then there you are sitting with it, and you can't prevent that. And I think you shouldn't try. Is that right? Because my understanding is that you really can't, but you can then recognize it through probably some kind of mindfulness practice. And you talk a lot about this stuff and deal with it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're incredibly on point. I mean, it's almost like you should definitely write my next book with me. And no, I don't think I ever want to write another book, but yeah, you get it. I think, like, when was the last time you tried to like control someone else's feelings or talk them out of their feelings?
Right before this interview.
Right. Well, this is not Severance, right? Like, a lot of us have seen Severance. The last I heard, we aren't able to like completely split our consciousness so that we can like compartmentalize our lives and not feel certain things at certain times. Grief is full of sneak attacks. And guess what? It's full of sneak attacks 12, 20, 30 years down the line. You could be in like, Kohl's reaching for the clearance rack, and then all of a sudden they're playing like Shania Twain, and you're like, I don't know, back in like Mother's Day, 1998. And it feels really real. It's like a time machine. And so you can't prevent them. And that's not your fault, because you can't control your brain all the time. Right. And your neurons in grief, it's a facet. There's actually a book out there called The Grieving Brain, which I would recommend, which helps you understand what your brain actually does in grief. And it kind of allows you to cut yourself a break when you're like, oh my God, I can't believe that I just went to call my boyfriend for like the 30th time and he's dead. It's not your fault. Your neurons honestly haven't caught up to the reality yet. And so, yes, you cannot prevent thoughts from popping up. I think the most important thing to learn eventually is that they're going to come. Yeah. The waves are going to come, and sometimes they're going to be like typhoons. Sometimes they're just going to be like little gentle waves. The more that you can accept that they will come, and you don't know what size they're going to be, I think that's like a better way to go through it, because you're just accepting and you're not shocked when it happens. And then you have these different tools. Like you said, mindfulness is a really good one. We do a monthly mindfulness session for our virtual Modern Loss community, and it's wonderful. We also do yoga for grief support. There are all these different ways to listen to your body, listen to your mind, all these different exercises that you can do that can speak to whatever you need in that moment. Because sometimes you need like a primal release. Sometimes you need to calm yourself the fuck down. There's no one size fits all.
Right. Let's end on an anecdote from your work, something that you learned from someone that you interviewed. There's a lot of people that you've talked to, experts that you've talked to, but so much about people and their own loss. Is there anybody's story that you want to share, Rebecca, that we all can learn from that through your work?
Oh, gosh. Well, I interview a different person for our newsletter every month, which is like a deep dive, because I don't write for the website a lot. I mean, it's really about a community. It's literally not about me. Awesome. So I've spoken with, over the last year, I interviewed Cynthia Nixon, Alyssa Limperis, who I love. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She's a comedian in LA, but she's from Massachusetts. So she's like, a mass comedian in LA, and amazing. And she did this one woman show, which I love, called No Bad Days, about her dad's illness and death from glioblastoma. And like, how amazing is that? Like this woman literally, you don't, by the way, I should interject myself and say, you don't have to make your grief into a mission. Like you don't have to turn your experience with adversity. Like you don't have to freaking run the Iron Man in honor of your dad. You don't have to create a one woman show in honor of your person. You don't have to do any of that. You just need to move through it in a way that helps you. How
about this? I want to say this. You just need to, you don't have to, there's no right or wrong way except for trying to, I want to say, lessen suffering in general.
Yeah. Yes. I want you to lessen the suffering for yourself. Yeah. I do. Yeah. Because you're alive and you deserve to live your life in a way that feels like you're not suffering, or at least the suffering is abated. I mean, will everything be okay? No. But was it ever beforehand? Probably not. Yeah. It's just maybe not going to be okay in different ways, but then it might be okay in surprisingly new ones. And I'm not trying to be all like Pollyanna-ish and like gloss over the fact that there are awful losses out there. There have been mass shootings. There are people who lose their kids to gun violence. Mm-hmm. There are racially based, hate crimes. It's awful what's happening. There's a war in freaking Ukraine. It's awful. I'm not trying to kind of skip over that enormous abject pain that people go through and the suffering. But I am pointing out a fact, which is you are alive. And so you deserve the chance to live out that life in a way that you want to. And if you want to live it in a way that's got richness in it and got humor and happiness and satisfaction to a certain extent, you got to try and get that for yourself. And sometimes it means getting help from others, but sometimes it means figuring out what you need, because the world, sadly, as we both know, is just not going to serve it to you on a silver platter. It sucks. And we suck at that in this country. We're not good at supporting the bereaved. But, that's why I wrote the book, because sometimes do you mean by that, on us.
What I heard when you said we're not good at supporting the bereaved, I don't know, for whatever reason, I heard like policy wise. Do you mean just culturally though, right?
I think culturally, policy wise, like, don't get me started. There's literally no national job protections, no national bereavement job protections. We tried. We tried really hard last year.
If you're a 40-year-old man and your child died in a tragic accident, there should be some kind of a few weeks off paid.
If you are a 40-year-old man and your child dies in a tragic accident today, you could quite literally get fired tomorrow if you don't go to work, if your company does not have a bereavement policy.
And other countries have that?
Some countries do have that, yes.
I'm not really
familiar with that. And I would like the United States to have that, because there are different companies that have bereavement leave policies.
I think what we do have in America is sometimes a boss who's not an asshole who's like, you know what, listen, Bruce, why don't you take as much time as you need? But probably he's one in 100 or something. Like
literally, absolutely. That's so astute of you. Like, for me, just my personal experience, like my mom died when I was at Colbert, and I was very lucky to have an empathic round of managers and people at the helm who understood grief and were very supportive. But I kind of had to ask for what I needed, because it's not like I was 30 and I was surrounded. I was kind of the guinea pig in our cohort. Everybody was kind of youngish and starting out their lives and in build mode. I got to be the guinea pig that was like, oh, here's what happens when the shit hits the fan. Yeah. Here's what someone might need. But it wasn't like they handed me the handbook and said, here's our detailed bereavement leave policy. No, I had to kind of ask for it and figure it out. And a lot of companies give like, I would say, the median number of days is like 3 days, but like, there's no national policy. So like if your company doesn't have that, or you don't just happen to have a boss who's cool, who kind of gets it and wants to help you out, yes, you could be SOL when it comes to your job, because you don't have any national protections. And that is absolutely infuriating.
Yeah. Yeah. This is such important work. This book is so good. Everybody should get it. The Modern Loss Handbook. Also, just check out the website. Everything will be linked in the show notes, Rebecca. But if there's anything else you want to say about your work or plugs here at the end, modernloss.com, modernloss.com. Go there right now, but get the book. You have really done an amazing thing, and I am so excited to reconnect. And I hope that you'll be our grief correspondent here on Stand Up.
I would love to be your GC. That would be an honor.
Join us now. So it sounds like you suffered a loss, like an insensitive throw to the grief counselor. So it sounds like you suffered a loss. Let's go to Rebecca. Rebecca, go ahead. Well, how can you help Gary?
Trust me, I am a lot of people's go-to grief doula.
That's
when
be tough.
6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, it's like, my stepmother's friend had a loss, and can you maybe talk to her? And I'm always happy to, but I'm also still just a person in the world, in this world of this day, freaking out about everything. So, that's why I'm glad that there's a book where I could kind of put all the stuff that I've learned and all the stuff that the modern loss community has taught me, because it's so much wiser collectively than I am individually. And there's a lot of advice that is from a lot of my, professional advisors, people who run bereavement organizations and who are trauma therapists and practitioners. And so I would encourage someone to check this out and give it a chance to help you or somebody else, because I do think it can. And then, is this going up tomorrow?
Yeah.
Okay. Can I say one event for tomorrow night?
Yeah, for sure. It'll be
okay.
Yep. Tuesday, the 24th, I'll post. Yep.
Oh, perfect. So, so I would love to invite anybody in New York City, Wednesday, May 25th, tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. I'm actually going to be celebrating the launch of this book in real life at Rizzoli Bookstore in Flatiron, which is the most beautiful bookstore. And I'm doing a live storytelling event with, coincidentally, 2 friends from Colbert, Michael Cruz-Kane and Steve Waltine, the writers over at The Late Show.
Wow.
And Michael also hosts the terrific podcast called A Good Cry.
Yeah, I've heard all about it. I heard it's really good.
He's amazing. And then Sarah Benincasa, a fabulous comedian.
Sarah's amazing. Really talented, amazing woman. Yeah.
She's terrific. And my friend Rachel Sklar. So please.
Rachel Sklar?
Yeah.
Tell her I said hello. Tell all of them I said hello. That's so cool.
I will.
And will that be, do you think that event will live online?
I hope so. If you're a videographer and would like to capture that, please reach out to me. But yeah, I'm hoping so. I try to tape all of our events.
Awesome.
But yes, please do come. I think it'll be a really wonderful event. And our storytelling events are really terrific, because that is literally where you can find your people. That's where you can find your people who are willing to listen to stories like this and need to, and connect over the hilarity of it and the awfulness of it. And it's just a real human thing. So yeah, 6:30 Wednesday, the 25th at Rizzoli Bookstore. I know that at least I will be there.
I'm so happy that you were here with me virtually, and I can't wait to maybe someday see you in person, but talk to you again about this such an important subject. Congratulations. Thank you so much, Rebecca. It's so great to reconnect with you. Seriously.
Thanks, Pete.
Okay, there you go. Rebecca Soffer, please let her know that you heard her here on the show. Go tweet at her. Thank her for joining me. I highly recommend getting that book. That is an official Stand Up with Pete Dominick high recommend. Follow on Twitter at Modern Loss, at Rebecca Soffer, Soffer, and get that new book, The Modern Loss Handbook, right now. I promise you won't regret that one. All right, you're going to love my conversation with Toluse Olorunnipa, who is joining me for the first time. But before that, I do have to tell you about Indeed.com, because if your company is hiring, well, you need Indeed. You know you want whoever you're going to hire to have great problem-solving skills, to think like an entrepreneur. The thing you need help with? How to find them. Who are they? Where are they? That's easy. You need Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place, which makes life easier. So instead of spending hours on all these different job sites searching for all kinds of different candidates with the right skills and trying to put it all together, use Indeed, because they're a powerful hiring partner that can help you do it all. Find great talent faster through time-saving tools like Indeed Instant Match, assessments, and virtual interviews, which are always fun. With Instant Match, over 80% of employers are getting quality candidates. Their resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job, according to Indeed data. And I got a lot of listeners who have used Indeed, so you should too. They've reached out and told me all about it. I can't even read all their testimonials, but they can tell you that Indeed saves you headaches. An interview virtually with no downloads, plugins, or purchases. Do it all in one place. With their reliability assessment, they can even predict candidates' punctuality and work attendance. So say they're showing up at the shed late every day, you just got to let them go. But that won't be the case if you find somebody at Indeed, because you're already going to know. Even better, Indeed's the only job site where you only pay for applications that meet your must-have requirements. Indeed is unbelievably powerful hiring partner, delivering 4 times more hires than all job sites combined, according to Talent Nest 2019. Join more than 3 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Sign up for Indeed now and get a $75 credit towards your first sponsored job. Plus, earn up to $500 in sponsored job credits with Indeed's virtual interviews. Visit Indeed.com/standup to learn more. Claim your credits at Indeed.com/standup. Indeed.com/standup. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Okay, we did it. Thank you. Now it's time to get to my second guest. He is a highly respected, award-winning reporter at the Washington Post. Formerly at Bloomberg and the Miami Herald, he graduated from Stanford, which I bust his chops for because he's just so qualified and credible and really, really smart. The new book is about George Floyd, but it's also about the system that contributed so much to his eventual death. It's about his life. It's a landmark biography by 2 prize-winning Washington Post reporters. He also wrote it with Robert Samuels, which reveals how systemic racism shaped George Floyd's life and legacy, from his family's roots in the tobacco fields of North Carolina to ongoing inequality in housing, education, healthcare, criminal justice, and policing. Telling the story of how one man's tragic experience brought about a global movement for change. It is so good, and I'm really excited to welcome him to the show for the first time. Please welcome right now, Toluse Olorunnipa.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
How you doing?
Hey, man. Great to meet you. Big fan.
Yeah. Likewise. It's good to see you as well.
Yeah, I'm really, really excited to talk to you. Congratulations, and thank you so much for making time.
Oh, no. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, then. Here we go. All right, I've just told you all about him in this very important book, and I'm very excited to have him joining me here for the first time. He's a first-timer here on Stand Up, hopefully not the last time. Toluse Olorunnipa. How did I do with the pronunciation? Oof.
That was absolutely perfect.
Where is where is that surname? Is that, I don't want to guess.
Nigeria. My parents are both immigrants from Nigeria.
Are you first generation?
I am. I was born here. I lived there for a little bit when I was a baby, but then came back, and I go back. All my relatives are there, but my immediate family's here. Yeah.
And where did you grow up in the States?
Tallahassee, Florida, which is more Georgia than it is Florida.
Wow,
but it's,
sir.
Yeah.
I didn't. I looked. I mean, I know you worked at the Miami Herald at one point, but I should have.
I did.
I should have done a deeper dive. What was that like? Tallahassee. I don't know your age. I think you're younger than me. But how was your childhood there? First generation too.
I enjoyed it. It wasn't until I went off to college that I knew that there was so much more to the country. It was my little slice of America, and I didn't know. We didn't travel that much, so it was what I knew, and it was safe, and it was peaceful. It was, I didn't have to grow up too fast, so I don't have any complaints about it. But when I started working and seeing new places, and then I got the bug for travel, and I was like, I've got to go and see a bunch of places because I've been sheltered for this whole time.
Well, I promise you, we're going to talk about this amazing and important new book. But I just you've not been on, and I'm a big fan of your work, and I'm just wanted to get to know you and let my audience get to know you, and hopefully follow and support the rest of your career. And so I just want to, why journalism? Why does a first generation young black man go to, I guess, college for it and then pursue a career in it? And you've done a lot. You've worked at obviously a lot of different outlets and done different types. So why would you pick this?
Well, it goes back to my immigrant parents. I mean, they were news junkies. They realized that if they were going to make it in this country, they needed to be aware of what was happening. They needed to consume information as much as possible. And they instilled that in me and my siblings. And they wanted us to be well read and be able to write and be able to consume the news. And it got to a point that I wanted to be part of making the news because I knew that when my parents had information, that helped them live somewhat on a level playing field with people who had been here before. When they didn't have information, they were taken advantage of. They made mistakes. They missed out on benefits that they could have had. And I realized how much information and good news and good journalism can shine a light on things, illuminate things for people, and look out for people who otherwise are just trying to, live the American dream and may not have the time to go through a bunch of stacks of documents to find out things. But if a journalist can do that work and present it in a way that's easy to understand and allow them to live their lives a little bit better, and also hold powerful people to account so that they're not taking advantage of the less powerful, then, I could make a little bit of a difference. So that's why I got into it. And that's been my guiding light ever since I've continued to be a journalist.
And you're one of those arrogant jerks that writes at Stanford in his Twitter bio. So, I mean, that's got to be top 3 schools to get into or something like that. Why? Did you go there for journalism?
It's hard. I studied sociology and communication. So
cool.
I was I knew I was on a journalism path, but I got a scholarship for sociology. So sociology it was. But I took a lot of journalism classes and wanted to make sure that I continued on that pathway, did internships every summer and worked at newspapers, small and large, across the country, and just started trying to build skills as a writer and trying to figure out how to tell stories in a way that would make a difference and make an impact and hopefully, make the world a little bit better.
You have been super successful at that, for sure. I'm sure you know that in your career as a journalist, but now certainly in this book. By the way, Stanford was my safety school. I ended up at the State University of New York at Cobleskill with an associate's degree because I just didn't want to be like you, I guess, How many sweatshirts do you have and hats? Do you go out with us at Stanford?
It's been like 3 or 4 years since I've been back on the West Coast and been able to stop by. So I don't even have the gear whenever I go back to campus.
They'll hear this. The alumni office will hear this and hook it up because you're a big deal now, a very successful alumni. One more question, just kind of about you and your progress in journalism. Who did you look up to? Who do you look up to now? Who have you had the pleasure of maybe working with? You've worked at the Miami Herald and Bloomberg, and now, of course, the Washington Post, and writing this book with your colleague there, Robert Samuels, right?
Yeah. And Robert has been a role model for me because he started off a few years before I did, and he's one of the people I look up to as a journalist. Growing up, my parents used to watch 2020 every day that show came on. They would watch 60 Minutes, and folks like Andy Rooney would always be a voice that I would hear in my living room. Bill Whitaker and folks like that, people who do long form investigative journalists. Those are the kinds of folks that I wanted to model my career after because I knew that they were uncovering things that made people think, made people want to do something differently than what they were doing before. So that's even before I got into covering politics and covering policy and all of that, I wanted to do the kind of storytelling that, people would think after listening or watching or reading what I had done. And that's still something that I'm hoping to do. And there's still people that do it so well that I'm envious and wishing that I can follow in those footsteps. But that's kind of how I got into the industry, and that's been my sense of responsibility is sort of making sure that we do journalism that's important, that makes people think and makes a difference.
That's awesome. I love it. Well, you are. This book is so important for so many different reasons. His name is George, One Man's Life and the Struggle for Racial Justice. What led to this? Because as many books don't start as a book, you were already working on the story and a project documenting him for the Washington Post. And what led to all of this? Is that right?
Yeah, as soon as George Floyd died and we saw the massive response from the country, we saw people taking to the streets, we knew that we were going to have to cover this. This was a moment in American history. This quickly became the biggest civil rights movement since the 60s, and we knew that it was going to be something to cover with the full force of the Washington Post. So we put a team together, and one of the things we wanted to do was find out about George Floyd's life. A lot of people saw him die. A lot of people saw the worst moments of his life as he was suffocating, but we knew there was a lot more to the story, including, a life that he had spent striving and struggling and living and having highs and lows. And we wanted to tell that story in its fullness and show what it said about America, that Floyd had experienced life over almost 5 decades. What did he experience? What kind of America did he have? And we titled that series George Floyd's America because it's a version of America that a lot of people don't know. It's a version that includes some of the aspects of institutional racism, living poor, growing up in poverty, living in segregated communities, going to segregated schools that are underfunded, getting stuck and caught in the criminal justice system that targeted people that looked like him, and also having healthcare outcomes that were negative in part because of the color of his skin. So we wanted to really break that down for people and show how his experience exemplifies systemic racism in the 21st century. There aren't burning crosses. There aren't whites only fountains. It's a different form of racism that people face now. And George Floyd happened to be one person that faced it in so many different ways that we thought that by showing and highlighting his story, people might understand things at a little bit of a deeper level.
I don't know if you saw yesterday, well explained, obviously. I don't know if you saw yesterday, it might have been your paper, it might have been the New York Times, no offense, but it's something, I didn't read it, I just remember I scanned it and it said somebody had written a column about how we're forgetting George Floyd. And
yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. And outside of that, what I've experienced in the Board of Education campaign here in my town in Rockland County, New York, is the backlash to George Floyd death and what it led to, which is, I'm glad what you guys call it, but it always seemed to me, was the civil rights movement, at least for racial justice of our generation. It was a continuation of the racial justice civil rights movement that has always existed in this country. But people now, there's this big backlash to that. And of course, we've seen that throughout history, and we've talked with a lot of people about that. But so do you have a sense that as your book comes out, the timing is good to remember and to learn, as I did for the first time, about who George Floyd was?
I hope so. This big backlash makes the timing kind of difficult because books are actually being banned, and the kinds of books that focus on the same things that we focus on, describing this country's history, talking about slavery and how it intersected with George Floyd's family history, talking about institutional racism. There are some places where that could be banned, or we could be, essentially outlawed from being taught in schools. But I do hope that as we're looking at the second anniversary, as people are taking stock and seeing how the country has changed positively, negatively since George Floyd died, that they will take a look at this book and look at the fact that he was more than a symbol. He was more than a protest movement. He was a human being, and a lot of the things that he faced in life are the things that people protest and people are talking about when it comes to institutional racism, when it comes to police brutality, when it comes to, criminal justice issues that need to be changed and reformed in our country. So I do hope that people will take this moment, take this anniversary to find out a little bit more about George Floyd, the person who sparked all of it, find out about what his life was like, find out about the aftermath of his death, and grapple with the backlash that we're seeing. What we saw in Buffalo was part of that backlash, people feeling like there's a replacement theory that needs to be considered, and it needs to be an ideology that could grow. So that's something that I hope people will focus on, because it's very relevant to what we're facing in the country today.
Tolu, where are you on replacement theory? No, it's like a debate. It's like I saw something like, I don't know, some huge percentage of Republicans are like, yeah, we're for that. It's crazy. Let's talk about that another time. How did you guys write this book? Because your pinned tweet says 400 plus interviews, 400 plus years of history, 400 plus pages. So, the first it's all interesting and contextual, but how did you guys write this book? 400 interviews of who?
Everyone who knew George Floyd, people who are experts who knew about the systems he navigated, policymakers, mayors, governors. We interviewed the president. We wanted to take a bottom to top approach of people who knew Floyd personally and could contextualize and humanize him for us, recreate stories and recreate scenes that he was part of. But this book is not just a biography that just says these are the scenes of George Floyd's life. We wanted to talk about the context of his life, the systems that impacted him, the system of the war on drugs and mass incarceration. We had to talk to experts because George Floyd was caught up in that system. He was impacted by that system. He was stopped by the police more than 20 times over the course of his life. And 6 of those officers were later charged with crimes and corruption, including falsifying arrests and putting fake charges on people like George Floyd. So we wanted to show how those systems were created. And it involved a lot of research. It involved a lot of discussions. It involved a lot of hard interviews with people who were still in mourning. And it involved us trying to describe the America that George Floyd knew and the systems that impacted his life, as well as the systems that took his life, including the police system and the police department in Minneapolis. So we spent time in Washington, D.C. We spent a lot of time in Houston, Texas, spent a lot of time in Minneapolis and other cities where we did interviews with people who knew Floyd or knew the systems that he navigated to try to present a full picture of what his life was like.
Yeah, I think you taught me that George Floyd was born in Houston, Texas, spent the first part of his life there, and then moved to Minneapolis for a change that we'll get into, a positive change that we'll get into. But you mentioned you interviewed hundreds of people who knew George Floyd. There was a question I just want to ask you that a lot of people had. Did Derek Chauvin, the cop who murdered him, know George Floyd? They lived in the same town for a long time. They were in the same places. It's not a big town. And there were a lot of questions that maybe there was something, maybe he was targeted specifically for some other reason. Any evidence?
We researched this very closely because we had heard those rumors. We did document that they did work in the same place. They worked at the same nightclub in the same building. But there was no evidence that there was any animosity, that they actually had a relationship or that they knew each other at a deeper level. What we did find out, because we researched Derek Chauvin as well, and we researched his experience in the police department, was that it was not uncommon for him to use this kind of force against people. He had done so many times. So even if he didn't have animosity against George Floyd, he was the kind of person that would use excessive force on a regular basis, kneel on someone's neck because he thought they were too big, not take his knee off, even though they weren't moving, even though they were no longer breathing, because that was just the kind of person he was. And we documented several times where he used similar tactics against children, against men, and he was complained about on a regular basis as being somebody who used excessive force. So even as we researched and we found out that even though they moved around in some of the same spaces, it didn't appear that they had any personal beef, but Derek Chauvin was just the kind of person that didn't need that level of motivation to use that level of force against someone who was crying out for help.
Let's start where he started, which is in 1973 in Houston, right, where he was born. And I'm going to go ahead and say, and you can push back if you think this is wrong or something, but I'll just say that there's never been a good time to be born in black in America, and certainly not a good time to be a black man in America. And I think that you guys connect the dots, and I've covered this issue my whole career about the criminal justice system, mass incarceration, etc. Everybody should read Michelle Alexander's book. It's still the most relevant in my mind on the subject, The New Jim Crow. And it changed the way I think about everything, even though I kind of knew it, but not with all the research. Anyway, he was born at a time when the criminal justice system was gearing up to become more punitive in so many different ways, and obviously disproportionately to people of lower income, and even more specifically black men. So push back or thread that needle, split that hair if you want, but I think that's important to the year he was born, and I guess where he was born. Texas matters.
Oh, definitely. I couldn't have put it any better. Okay. I also, had to engage with Michelle Alexander's book as a part of writing this, because so many of the themes that she brings up were so relevant to George Floyd's life. And like you said, Texas was a state that was really on the bleeding edge of all of these pieces of mass incarceration. They were one of the most punitive states, and George Floyd found himself caught up in that system. Born in 1973, the country's incarceration rate had held steady for decades. And then right in the early 70s, we start to skyrocket in terms of the number of people we're locking up. And disproportionately, there are people who look like George Floyd, people who are poor, people who are minorities, people who are men, and they are being put into jail for nonviolent drug offenses over and over and over again, targeted by police for doing the same things that were happening in college campuses and in wealthy neighborhoods that police either turned a blind eye to or didn't even investigate. And instead of, having equal justice, police were circling George Floyd's neighborhood looking for people to arrest, and he got caught up in that over and over and over again. And even one of the cops that arrested him was later charged with falsifying arrests on hundreds of minority men just because he knew they couldn't afford a lawyer, because he knew it was an easy arrest, an easy way to get overtime hours or to get commendation. And George Floyd was caught up in that system. And that was a huge part of his life. The fact that he spent so much time behind bars for nonviolent offenses, for drug possession. And as a result of that, you can't get a job. As a result of that, you can't provide for your family. As a result of that, you're poor again, and you're forced to make difficult choices that may lead you to this underground economy that he was in. So it was important for us to showcase that part of his life as well, because it is a system that decimated entire communities, as Michelle Alexander writes about, and George Floyd's community was one of those.
One of the things I've come up against for my entire career of arguing with folks about these issues is they'll often say, I grew up poor and I made something of myself, or I had setbacks, but I made the right choices. I was responsible. We all have similar opportunities in life. You made bad choices. You ended up there. You didn't work hard on whatever. And it's always been a heaping mountain of bullshit. But that's hard to convince people of. Your book goes a long way, I feel like, of demonstrating why that isn't the case, using George Floyd's life as an example. And one of the things I guess you rarely think about, but that your book comes back to quite a bit, Rao, is that George Floyd was always very mindful of he was a big dude. And big men are in one category, and big black men are in maybe a much different category. Why did you guys spend a lot of time on that aspect of his life? I mean, and put all of that together. It matters so much, and you never would have thought about that. I mean, most of us don't.
Yeah, in those interviews that we did, we heard people recreate conversations that they had with Floyd in which he explained how he related to his body. He said he would go into a room, look around, and meet everyone, shake everyone's hand, look them in the eye, just to make them feel at ease, because he knew as soon as he walked into that room at 6'6", 225 pounds, someone who worked out, the people would look at him and they would put a certain stereotype on him. He's an intimidating guy. He's someone who might hurt me. He's someone who might be violent towards me. He's someone I need to be fearful of. And his personality was so much different. He was a mama's boy. He was someone who was kind-hearted, who would go around saying, I love you to friends, male and female. And he didn't want people to put that stereotype on him as this violent guy. And obviously we saw in his last moments, the police did not give him the benefit of the doubt. And one of the things he said to the cops was, why don't you believe me? I'm not that kind of guy. I'm not a bad guy. Because he knew that they were going to put a stereotype on him just because he was big, just because he looked the way he did. And that's exactly what happened. The officer said we had to control him because he was a big guy. And that's why they continued to be on him and stand on him and put their knees on him, even though he wasn't breathing, even though he was still in the prone position for several minutes. So it was important to his death. It was important to his life. And we wanted to explore that in this book.
I always have I don't know, maybe it's ignorance, maybe I'm being too empathic, but I feel like when you guys refer to what might be called his missteps or choices, I never feel like it's fair in people's lives. I don't know. I excuse almost every behavior because I think we make the choices that we make for any number of a series of reasons, including myself. But George Floyd was arrested several times, drug charges. He was an addict at a time, by the way, when addiction was not seen the way it is now. Certainly there weren't the resources. That matters as much as maybe anything to his life, I would say, after reading your book. He pled guilty to armed robbery. He spent years in prison. You mentioned that. His friends and family spoke to you really openly about his criminal record. What did you learn about his struggles? And what do you think about what I'm saying in terms of its choices or missteps? I don't know. Sometimes you're limited with the options that you have based on where you grew up, the vessel that you're traveling in, the resources that you have access to. So what did you learn about his situation? How much different was it than other black men born when he was born, similar place, similar, maybe limited resources? Sorry for any assumptions I'm making there.
No, we spent a good deal in the book documenting this part of Floyd's American experience. He spent a lot of time behind bars. A third of his adult life, he was locked up several times. Never having seen a jury, by the way. He pled guilty every time because, as Michelle Alexander points out in her book, guilty pleas are really the only choice in some of these situations, even if you feel like you're innocent. And there are some situations where he told his friends and family he was guilty. There were some situations where he told his friends that he was innocent, and they still told him plead guilty, because if you try to fight this with a court-appointed lawyer, you're going to get a much longer jail sentence. So take the deal. But it was important for us to explore this time in his life because he was introspective. He wrote about his, the dark periods he was in. He agonized over some of the mistakes that he made, some of the challenges that he faced in trying to navigate the court system as a poor Black kid that was not able to afford a lawyer or get any kind of the benefit of the doubt. And it was important for us to explore that part of the American system, too, because there are, like you said, millions of other people that are trying to navigate these systems without any help, without lawyers, without support. And as soon as you make a mistake, or as soon as you are perceived to have made a mistake, the system closes in on you and traps you. And all of a sudden, for the rest of your life, you're branded a felon. And that makes it hard for you to get a job. And without a job, you have to provide for your family. And the only thing that's presented to you is going back to the streets where you think you can at least try to make a living for a time. But then the police are everywhere and they're focused on your neighborhood and not focused on other neighborhoods. So you suffer the consequences of drug possession while others do not suffer the consequences. And like you said, at the time that George Floyd was first experiencing substance use issues, was not seen in an empathetic. It was seen as a let's lock everybody up and throw away the key way. That's what happened to Floyd. He wrote at one point that he was suffering from addiction as he was in jail. They gave him an intake form and he said, I'm suffering. He admitted, I'm suffering from this Percocet addiction. I need help. And they told him that he was faking a mental illness. Oh. They put him in a cell and they let him while away and deal with his issues on his own. So even when he admitted that he needed help, he was basically discarded and not given the empathy that we've seen now when the opioid crisis hit other communities and became more widespread. But it became more empathetic and there became a more sympathetic response. George Floyd didn't benefit from any of that. He suffered and he spent a lot of time behind bars for what he did and even for things that he said that he didn't do.
I'll do maybe a 15 to 20 second rant and not end on a question, but maybe there's something from the book that you can, comment on. But George Floyd is an example of millions and millions. Let's just say, we could say families, we could say Black and brown, we could have all kinds of caveats, but I'll just stick to Black men whose lives were destroyed by drugs, by the criminal justice system, by possession of drugs, destroyed. And if a man's life is destroyed, so is his family's life. So it's been well documented that millions and millions of Black families, as a result of Black men being incarcerated for possession, we could just stick to that. We don't have to talk about violent crime and other things. We don't have to talk about education and employment opportunities. Just drug possession destroyed a generation, maybe more, maybe two, of American Black men. And I don't know if you want to add any caveats, or I don't know if you want to use an example. But to me, I think about that all the time. Every time I see like a Black face in prison, I wonder, is that guy there because he had drugs 3 times and so he's there the rest of his life? You hear about these sentences, they're real, and then you see him in the papers. You see him with a knee on his neck and you think, well, he must have done something. Yeah, he might have had drugs and his life and his family's life is destroyed. That was longer than 20 seconds, Toluse, but I'm done.
Yeah, no, that's something we really take head on in the book. And we talk about how so many administrations, so many presidencies over decades embraced this war on drugs, from Nixon to Reagan to Bush 1, Bush 2, Clinton. This was something that presidents and politicians campaigned on and rode into office on the backs of millions of Black men being locked up. And it was something that later we realized as a country was excessive, and we're starting to unravel some of it. There have been some laws that have been changed, but the damage has been immeasurable in terms of communities being decimated, families being decimated, an entire generation being left behind, locked up, scarred. You have to remember that prisons are places that are traumatizing. And for people who are nonviolent, who only had possession, sometimes they leave prison much worse off and much more likely to commit other crimes. And that was something that Floyd experienced, and it's something that decimated his community, and it's something that we covered in the book as well.
And he tried so hard, clearly, to make good choices. He did good things for people. You guys do such a great job documenting it. But my time with you is over, unfortunately, because I have so many more questions about this book. I guess maybe I just end on a personal one. You and your co-author are Black men. You seem in this conversation non-emotional, but I know you're a human. How hard was this for you to learn about and write? And thank you for doing it. And by the way, I mean, I don't know what you learned in this, but I would argue this is a book for white people. Like, you're not learning as much about Black America or George Floyd's life that you didn't kind of already know almost specifically. So I don't know if you, both those questions, how did you deal with it? And who is this book for, do you think?
Yeah, this was a really tough book to write.
Sure.
I had avoided watching the video of George Floyd dying for more than a year.
Really?
Even though I was a journalist, even though I was covering it,
Wow.
I knew enough about what happened. I said I wasn't going to watch someone dying on camera again.
Wow.
I had seen, what happened after Michael Brown, after Trayvon Martin, after Tamir Rice. I had seen enough, and it was traumatizing. So I said I wasn't going to watch it, but we had to recreate the scene of his death for this book, and I had to watch that video over and over and over again. And it was incredibly traumatizing and painful to see how many times his life could have been spared and how much disregard the officers had for this Black life, and know that, if I found myself in the same situation crying for breath, the officers probably wouldn't listen to me either, in part because of the way I look. And that's really hard to think, even as a Black person, that even if you make the right choice, it's difficult for you to.
Tolu, you broke up. You broke up one time in the entire interview, and it's really hard to think.
I know.
You said it's really hard to
I'm
think.
Sorry. Okay. Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you? Am I back on?
Yeah.
Okay. And it's really hard to think about what George Floyd experienced and know that it could have been you. Know that your card could be the next one to be pulled. Know that even if you make the right choices, even if you feel like you may be somewhat successful, if you're pulled over by the wrong officer who's having a bad day or who has the wrong training or who's just racist, they can take it out on you, and there's little that you can do about it. And that was the traumatizing thing to write about and to experience. And I do think it's right what you said, that this book is not a book only for activists or only for Black people. This is a book that needs to be read by every American who believes in this system, who needs to know that this system works in a different way. If you look like George Floyd, if you come from where George Floyd comes from, the land of opportunity is not full of so many opportunities for people like George Floyd. And we all have a responsibility to change that. And I do hope that people read this book, even if they feel like they already know the story, or if they feel like George Floyd doesn't deserve any sympathy because of his criminal record or anything like that. I think people should read it and really make the decision after reading it, after knowing about his life, not knowing what people post online, not knowing the memes, not knowing this conspiracy theories, but really knowing about a well-researched review of his life, and then make a decision about whether or not you think he had a shot, whether or not you think he deserves sympathy, whether or not we need to do something for the other George Floyds that are living in the darkness out there, being ignored by society, and what it's going to mean if we don't do something about it. I think that's an important lesson and an important thing for all of us to think about.
Your whole career has been important, but this book is massively important. And if you quit today, you would have made more than enough impact on the world just writing this book. It made a huge impact on me. So congratulations. Thank you for writing it. Thank you for joining me. And like I said at the beginning, I've always been a fan of your your reporting, which I hope that you'll continue to do. And I'd love to welcome you back on any of your future reporting or past reporting, because you've done some amazing things. Thank you for talking to me, Tolu. It's really great to meet you, and congratulations on the book, which is also in audio form. A lot of people listen to podcasts like that, right?
Yes, the audiobook is really, really good. It was narrated by Dion Graham, and it's really amazing. And I recommend that, especially if you don't have time to read it.
You got it. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, man. Congratulations to both you guys, you and Robert Samuels, who wrote this.
Thanks, Pete. I really appreciate it.
All right, there he goes. Toluse Olorunnipa. How ya like that? Great reporter. Great conversation. Super happy to sit down with him. The new book is His Name is George, One Man's Life and the Struggle for Racial Justice. His name is George Floyd, and the subtitle is. As I said, it co-written with Robert Samuels, also of the Washington Post. It's a great read, and I think that you will really learn a lot from it, as I am. I certainly haven't read the whole thing, but I'm going to try to because it's fascinating and important. And then maybe I'll have him again or his co-author back on. Who would you like me to have on the show? What guests would you like me to have on for the first time? I can get almost anybody to join me here on the podcast. I'm a pretty big deal, I guess. They come on, they chat. It's fun. We learn stuff. Hopefully become better, more thoughtful, kinder people. Trying to figure out solutions to the big problems that we're all facing and help each other while we're at it. How's that for a new tagline? Okay, let me know. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Any ideas for the show? standupwithpete@gmail.com. If you're a subscriber, I hope you'll join me tonight at the Hangout with an ideas fest, if you will. What's the future of the format of the show, which will always include at least 2 guests, maybe more, maybe you. That's all I've got for you. John Carroll, Emmy Award-winning singer, songwriter, original founding member of the Starland Vocal Band, and most importantly, one of our favorite people in this community. He wrote this for us. Stand up, folks. Be the change you want to see in the world. Bye-bye. Talk to you tomorrow or tonight.
Stand up, show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up. Oh, got to stand